Good morning, grandkids. This is the continuation of the reading of my writing based on my back series, The Listener. Today we will continue with episode 3 and the reading of chapters 4 and 5. And these chapters that I write is small because by the time I ever finish it, the book would be very small also. Not a big fat novel. Cut logs embedded in the hillside led upward through the bushes and trees like a mystery, adventure or danger. As I was continuing on down the paved road, this caught my eye and I was intrigued. I had time to check it out before hitting the trading post in the town ahead, before it closed. I turned up the wood steps to see if it led to something interesting, adventure or danger. I topped a small rise and could see the top of someone's head and part of the entrance to a mine. Was he an innocent miner on a break, a guard, or maybe a lookout for bandits? I dropped in to sneak and slipped in among some bushes behind a tree. When I peeked around the tree, he spotted me. I readied my bow as he whipped out a sword. I stepped to the other side of the tree with denser coverage. He was still focused on where I had been. I set the point of my arrow slightly above his throat and fired. He dropped like a stone. I lowered my bow and crept forward, watching for any movement, but no one else was around. I could see he wasn't a city guard, and he certainly wasn't a miner. So he probably was a bandit on guard with others inside, using this old mine as a hideout. I stooped down and picked up his sword, a heavy two-handed weapon that I would never use, but I could sell. Then I searched him for more sellable items and coin. The pickings were slim, and I decided to go on inside, where the pickings might get better. I moved to the mine entrance, hoping to sneak quietly inside, but worried that the loud creaking of the old boarded entrance might give me away. Inside it was gloomy and quiet. I stood still, listening, as I always do. Far in the distance I could faintly hear voices. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I could see that I was in a rock and dirt clogged, excavated tunnel. It became a twisting maze, damp and smelly. The smell was of hundreds of musty mushrooms. I decided to gather some as I walked along in case there was a potion shop in the town ahead. I would be needing as much coin as I could make. There were lit torches attached to the rock walls, which I snuffed out as I proceeded toward the voices. Ahead of me, I saw a tripwire, which I avoided, and a small cavern with a short wooden bridge in front of me. It was crossing over a small waterway. At the far end was a couple of wooden steps down to a camp at the water's edge. There stood the men that were arguing, only 2 of them. This would be easy, even with my bad weapons. I hid in the shadows to listen, as I always do. One seemed a little uptight about getting caught, while the other was reminding him of the lookout outside the entrance. A slow smile snuck across my furry face. My Khajiit teeth glimmered in the dark, knowing the one had reason for his fears. I knew I was right about them being bandits, and I knew that I was going to kill them. Looking around from my hiding place, I saw resources which I knew would be beneficial to me. I had looked and listened long enough. I lifted my bow, took aim on the leader, and fired. The arrow took him in the shoulder. As I mumbled curses, he turned, looking to see who was there and where. I was in a dark shadow and had stooped low. I knew he couldn't see me, and I waited. He was up the steps and headed my way, the fearful one trailing behind. He had no idea where I was, and was probably on his way to see why his lookout wasn't doing his job. I slid out my 2 daggers and waited. When the leader was just past me, I spun and slashed 1 dagger across the back of his knees. As he fell screaming, I continued in my spin and thrust my other dagger into the side of the one following. He turned toward me with his sword raised, and I gutted him, ripping my dagger upward. Continuing my momentum, I whirled and stabbed downward into the back of the first one, slipping the dagger between 2 ribs and into the heart. Leaving them to bleed, I sauntered down into their camp. There were sleeping bags on the gravel-strewn dirt floor and a fire with a pot of stew keeping warm. Nice. I knew I'd have a cozy place to sleep this night and something to eat. I walked around, checking things out. There was a stack of firewood to keep the fire burning. I had noticed outside another stack of wood and a chopping block with hatchet in case I needed more. Also, there was a pickaxe over near a vein of iron ore. Whenever I moved on, I'd be taking that with me. All of this waiting here for me with no sweat of my brow. Well, except for the killing. This seemed almost too good. I was nearly smacking my lips. The Khajiit gods must be smiling on this one. I knew that I'd be using this campsite as my own for the foreseeable future. I also knew that I was going to loot this mine of all that it had, no matter how many trips it would take into town to sell everything. I decided I had one more thing to take care of. I went back to the bodies, saw that they had finished bleeding out, and dragged them onto the bridge. I dumped them over the side and watched them float away, back among the underpinnings of another bridge. Wouldn't want them stinking up the place now, would we? This other bridge was placed at right angles from this one and crossed over to an opening into more of the mine. This was a drawbridge which was raised up against the far side. I wasn't going to worry about it now. Tomorrow was another day. Well, reader, whoever you are, I hope I haven't bored you. I'm going to eat, throw a piece of wood on the fire, and get some sleep. The drawbridge fell down with a bang. 2 bandits, with their weapons drawn, but too startled to move, fell down dead as I fired my bow. Once I had found the lever to lower the bridge, the rest was way too easy. I don't think these bandits are the sharpest variety. I crossed over and looted their bodies, tossing them over the side to float around with their equally unwise buddies below. I continued on through the tunnels until I came out into a large cavern. There was a lot of activity going on, so I hadn't been seen or heard. I slipped into the black shadow of a floor-to-ceiling stone pillar as I watched and listened. A smithy was busy at his forge, pounding on a red-hot sword, and a waterfall fell through a hole in the ceiling, splashing into a pool below. A wooden bridge spanned this pool from one stony wall of the cavern to a room on the opposite side. There was a ramp down to the smithy, and to my right, near my hiding spot, was another sleeping spot with sleeping bags. Also, coin on a table, waiting for my hand. So I took it. Such activities seem like I should be joining the Thieves Guild, but no, I am an assassin and always will be. But what is a person to do when there are goods everywhere just waiting to be taken? Anyway, I take it. Then I walked to the top of the ramp and casually fired an arrow into the back of the smithy below. He cried out before he fell, alerting others. I thought he was going to fall into his fire, but he missed it and fell on his glowing hot sword instead. I looked up as a woman rushed out onto the middle of the bridge, and she just stood there, looking around for trouble. Okay, lady, I thought, if that's how easy you want to make it, and took her down to the pool below with 2 arrows. Now I waited. Sure enough, a man came out of the room to see what all the commotion was about. He stepped onto that end of the bridge, which had ropes strung on either side, and he stood there, searching for intruders. He quickly spotted me, still standing on the ramp down to the smithy. He fired an arrow, but I had already sidestepped and fired 2 arrows in quick succession. I watched as he slowly slumped across the rope and hung there. I waited again. But since no one else appeared, I decided that the fun and games were over. Now I could get down to business. I started putting all the weapons in one pile, the armor in another pile. I piled up sellable food and drink. I picked more mushrooms, collected all potions that I could find sitting around, and put them in a pile together. I wondered how many trips I would have to make to town. A lot, it looked like. It was time to check out what was behind the waterfall. As I suspected, it was only a short tunnel to the exit. When I came out into the daylight, I heard a low snarl to my right, and there was a black wolf ready to launch himself at my throat. My daggers were in my hands, ready for him. As he sprang, I slipped under his front legs, avoiding those deadly claws and dripping sharp teeth. I slashed one dagger across his throat and plunged the other into his heart. It was a bloody mess, but a double kill for sure. I didn't want to lose the pelt or the meat, but I really didn't want to drag him inside either. I looked around and listened to see if he had any buddies with him. Nothing was moving, and there was silence, except for the birds. Since he didn't have a pack with him, he must have been mighty hungry to chance attacking a lone person. I made the decision to skin him and reserve the best parts of the meat. I'd leave the rest for any other critters and birds. I knew it wouldn't be long before there'd be nothing left but bones. I gathered up the pelt, chunks of meat, and headed back inside. I was going to be a bloody mess for sure. I headed through to my camp in the front and placed the meat and pelt near the fire. First thing on my agenda was to do something about the blood I had smeared all over me. I dropped my weapons and took off every speck of armor. I ran and jumped into the water, feeling like a little kid. Not that I had ever felt much pleasure as a kid. While I was splashing around, I felt something bump against me. I froze, trying not to think about what might be lurking in the water with me. I slowly turned around. There was a dead body with one eye staring at me. I let out a breath of relief as I realized I had totally forgotten about the men that I'd dumped in there. I determined to take care of this by finding some kind of lashing and tying them far back under the bridge. I got out of the pool, wet and dripping, and sat down by the fire to warm up and dry off. I thought about how to construct a makeshift stretching rack for my pelts. It would need scraped and fat rubbed into it. I had others I should work on also. Just thinking about it made me tired. Maybe I wouldn't head out for town in the morning. I had a lot of work to do. Oh well. For now, I'm going to have wolf haunch roast for supper, and then get some much needed rest. And that's the end of those 2 chapters for this reading. So I'll see you next Friday, grandkids, and I hope you're enjoying the story as written instead of as played. I do take some liberties with the series. I've added a lot of other stuff to the story to make it a story. So I'll see you next Friday. Bye-bye, grandkids.